Hi, I'm Jolene. I was married to a man whose family toasted his ex at dinner right in front of me. They called it tradition. They called her graceful. They called me nothing at all. And I stayed seated, smiling through pie, while they passed stories like salt shakers, pretending I wasn't even there. But when I found the necklace he gave me, still engraved with her initials, that's when I knew this wasn't oversight. It was design. So what happens when the woman you erased decides to write herself back in? Lakewood Manor had always looked like a postcard. Grand columns, manicured hedges, and that too-perfect gravel crunch under the tires. I'd only been there maybe a dozen times, but every visit left a new scratch somewhere I couldn't show. That night was my father-in-law's birthday, and I had ironed my navy blue dress 3 times. It wasn't flashy, but it was clean, respectful, what Vera might call appropriate. Garrett wore his usual gray jacket, the one with the frayed inner pocket that he swore no one noticed. I noticed. I noticed everything. When we walked in, the smell of rosemary and beef wafted from the kitchen, warm enough to pretend the place was welcoming. But it didn't take long for the illusion to crack. We were barely through the foyer when Vera waved at me like I was a friendly neighbor, not her daughter-in-law. She pulled Garrett in for a hug, then gestured toward the dining room. "You're just in time," she said. "We've saved your seat." She had, at the far end of the table, next to Aunt Ruth and her new husband, the man who still called me Janelle, even after 3 years. Garrett? He was seated 3 chairs from the head, right by Evelyn. At that moment, I should have left. I didn't, because I was raised to believe that people only win when you walk away too soon. I took my seat, adjusted my silverware, and told myself it wasn't a war. Then, Vera leaned across to her sister and said, "Just loud enough. She's sweet, but I always pictured someone more accomplished." I heard it. Garrett heard it. No one corrected her. No one paused. He chuckled softly, the kind of nervous deflection laugh I'd once found endearing. Then he changed the subject. And I sat there, suddenly unsure if my face was burning from the heater behind me or the words in front of me. In families like his, I thought, silence speaks louder than loyalty. We were barely on the second course when it happened. I looked up and saw it. The photo. Silver frame. Centered perfectly on the mantel. Garrett and Evelyn smiling on the deck of her family's lake house. He looked younger. She looked chosen. No pictures of our wedding. None of us at the beach last summer. Just that one, preserved like a relic in a home I was supposed to belong to. Vera caught me looking and smiled, walking by with her glass of Chardonnay. "That was a great day," she said. "So full of hope." I nodded, unsure if she meant the photo or the version of Garrett that used to exist. Dinner continued in quiet conversation and clinks of cutlery. Then came the shocker, though at this point I should have expected it. I saw her before I heard her. Evelyn, hugging Vera like she never left. Her hair was shorter now, a sharp bob that framed her face like something off a catalog. She wore pearl earrings, Vera's favorite style. I kept my breath even, counted to 4. "Don't blink," I told myself. "They don't get to see you blink." Garrett stood. "Oh, hey," he said, like she was an old friend, not an old flame. Evelyn smiled like she'd never had to rehearse how to be welcome in that house. Vera clapped her hands. "She's still close to the family," she said. "We thought it'd be nice." It was the word we that stuck. We. Not she. Not I. We. As in planned, coordinated, sanctioned. I looked at the table. Evelyn was seated next to Vera, to her right. Garrett was beside her. I was on the far end, closest to the swinging kitchen door. In Southern households, where you sit says everything about where you stand. I moved a green bean around my plate, barely chewing. Every smile at the other end of the table felt louder. Every toast, every anecdote, every time Vera touched Evelyn's arm, it echoed. And then Vera stood, glass raised. "A toast," she smiled, to grace, to family, and to old friends who remind us who we are. Her eyes never met mine. Garrett lifted his glass, and I watched it happen, watched everyone follow, like instinct. The clinking of glasses, the soft hum of agreement, Evelyn beaming, and me, still holding my water glass untouched. The moment their glasses touched, something shifted inside me. I couldn't feel the floor, couldn't feel my hands. My smile had stiffened, like it had been stitched onto my face in the dark. Vera's toast hung in the air longer than it should have. "To Evelyn," she said warmly, "whose grace and presence have been such a gift to this family. Then, now, and always." They all raised their glasses, Garrett included. No hesitation, no glance in my direction. He sipped like he'd just heard someone praise the weather. I lifted my glass too, but only halfway. My fingers trembled. Not from nerves. No, this was something else. Rage? Disbelief? Maybe both. I lowered the glass without drinking. I felt erased. Not overlooked. Erased. Like I had never existed in this picture-perfect family fantasy they'd built without me. Across the table, I heard a cousin whisper to her husband, "She really was the perfect match, huh?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. My jaw clenched. My thoughts ran wild. Had I misread all of this? Was I just tired, reading too much into old smiles and seating charts? But then I remembered something from earlier that week. Silas had called. Needed help with a last-minute specialist appointment. I dropped everything, called my contact at the clinic, drove him myself, paid the copay out of pocket when his card declined. Vera had thanked me, sure, barely. But 2 days later, in a group call with family, I heard her thank Evelyn for stepping up and helping out so much lately. Evelyn, who hadn't even been in town that week. It hit me like a slap made of silk, soft, dismissive, designed to make you feel silly for flinching. Back at the dinner table, Garrett reached for another roll, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. We were only 2 seats apart, yet he felt a continent away. His silence wasn't neutral. It was deliberate. The kind that says, "Let it go." Vera's voice cut through the room again. She was telling a story from years ago. Something about a ski trip. "Some women leave footprints," she said with a smile. "Others leave heels." Laughter followed. Of course it did. Evelyn laughed too, softly, knowingly. I stared down at my napkin. White linen, crisp, ironed. Like me, pressed into shape, expected to behave. I wanted to believe I was misreading the moment. But when no one, stepped in to shut it down, I knew. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was rehearsed. Dessert was brought out next. Peach cobbler, Evelyn's favorite, not mine. The plates passed around, the conversation shifting entirely toward her. What she was doing now, who she'd seen in Chicago, even her skincare routine. I sat alone at the end, untouched cobbler cooling in front of me. Photo ops started soon after. Vera instructed everyone to gather. "Let's get a good one for the newsletter," she said. A few of the women leaned in to take selfies with Evelyn. I stood, unsure where to place myself. No one called me into frame. No one asked if I was even in the shot. I didn't bother to smile, just stood back and watched them beam. The air felt thick, like I was underwater. I caught myself remembering something Maya Angelou once said. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Maybe I had known. Maybe I'd known for a while, but I kept rewriting the script in my head, giving them new lines they never agreed to read. Vera glanced over at me as the camera clicked. Her eyes met mine, calm and unapologetic. She raised her wineglass and mouthed, "You understand, don't you?" I smiled back. Not because I agreed, not because I forgave. I smiled because that was the night I stopped asking to belong. A week passed, but that night at Lakewood Manor lingered like a bad taste I couldn't rinse out. It followed me into work, into the grocery store, even into the silences between Garrett and me in the kitchen. I hadn't confronted him. I hadn't said a word. But every time I looked at him, I saw the stem of his wineglass raised in that quiet betrayal. Friday night, We were back at Vera's for another family dinner. Apparently, Evelyn had returned from a retreat in Asheville. Though by the way she walked in, heels clicking on the hardwood, she may as well have been crowned Queen of Kentucky. I was already seated when she arrived. Vera lit up like someone had brought a gift, not a guest. They exchanged hugs. Garrett stood to greet her, casual, too casual. Evelyn took the seat next to him without hesitation, her perfume trailing behind her like an announcement. "I ran into Heather from Tahoe last month," Evelyn said, her voice effortlessly warm. "She still talks about that weekend. Remember the fire pit? The proposal that almost happened?" Laughter erupted down the table. Silas even patted Garrett on the back, as if reminiscing about a trophy that was nearly won. Garrett smiled politely, then looked down at his plate. I didn't move. My fork hung in midair. They were talking about Lake Tahoe like it was a warm summer movie. The cabin, the music, the ring that had never actually left his pocket. He had told me once, in a late-night moment I thought was intimacy, that he'd taken a ring to that trip. "But it didn't feel right," he said. Now I understood why. It didn't feel right because he was still half waiting. I watched Evelyn describe the playlist they had made together, the wine he brought, even the wool blanket they'd curled under beside the fire. Garrett didn't stop her. Not once. He let it play out like a song he no longer had to pause for my sake. And me. I was sitting there like a placeholder, present but not participating. I heard Vera's voice, too smooth to be innocent. "Some memories are just for those who were there." She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I lifted my glass, sipped slowly, and kept my face still. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me flinch. I leaned back slightly, mentally taking note of every smirk, every shoulder turned toward Evelyn, every time my name wasn't mentioned. You don't interrupt an ambush, I thought. You document it. When we got home, Garrett went straight to bed. No small talk. No, "Are you okay?" He folded his clothes neatly, like routine could replace remorse, and laid down as if he hadn't just sat beside another woman who once held his future in her palm. I laid next to him in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Years ago, my mother once told me, "A woman doesn't lose her place unless someone pulls the chair." I finally understood what she meant. They weren't ignoring me. They were methodically removing me, piece by piece, photo by photo, story by story. I stayed still for a long while, heart thudding slow and stubborn. And then I got up. Quietly, so Garrett wouldn't stir. At my desk, buried under a few old files and pens that didn't work, was the slim black recorder I'd ordered months ago for work. Never opened, never used. I held it in my hand, felt its weight, pressed the button. A soft click confirmed it was live. If this was war, I whispered to no one, I needed to start recording the opening salvos. The sunlight didn't feel soft that morning. It barged in through the curtains, bright and unapologetic. I blinked at the ceiling for a while, the edges of last night still pressed into my memory like fingerprints on glass. Garrett's side of the bed was empty, sheets already cold. No note, just the sound of the front door having closed sometime around dawn, and his usual excuse echoing in my mind. Early meetings. I sat up, my eyes catching the small recorder on my nightstand. I hadn't used it yet, but I kept it charged. That was the first clue, when you start preparing for betrayal like you'd stock up for a storm. Later that afternoon, I went to the store to pick up coffee and paper towels. Something to fill the quiet. I was in the canned goods aisle when Malis turned the corner. Her smile was reflexive. She looked surprised, like she didn't expect to see me outside of family portraits. "Oh, hey, Evelyn," she said before freezing mid-step, her face catching up with her mouth. "Sorry, I meant Jolene. Habit, I guess." I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. "That wasn't a habit," I said flatly. "That was the truth." She laughed too loudly. "You know how it is. We've just known her so long." Right. I didn't stay for small talk. I nodded and pushed my cart past her. But in that moment, I stopped doubting. It wasn't my mind exaggerating. It was my body recognizing the tension before I let my brain give them another excuse. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cold wind bite at my cheek. Vera's voice was stuck in my head. "You understand, don't you?" I'd smiled when she said it. I had nodded, but now I understood what she meant. It wasn't compassion, it was confirmation. A statement disguised as a question, delivered with the same casual cruelty she used to hand out cobbler slices. That night, I looked around the house with fresh eyes. Garrett had left a scarf on the back of the dining chair. A floral pattern, not mine, Evelyn's. I remembered it from an old picture she'd posted at a vineyard in Oregon. I picked it up, held it for a second, then draped it back over the chair like it belonged there, because clearly it did. I moved into the den. A book lay open on the side table. Garrett had said he was reading it, for work. But on the inside cover, scribbled in looping, too familiar cursive, were the initials ER. I sat down. I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered to myself, "A woman knows when her space is being undone." 2 days later, Vera invited everyone to brunch. "Just siblings," she said. "Low key." But I knew better. I charged the recorder and slipped it into my purse. Not out of paranoia, out of necessity. I arrived to a table already half full. Garrett stood as I approached, but didn't say much beyond a quick, "Hey." I nodded, sat down, and played nice. Laughed in the right places, nodded where expected. It was theater, and I'd learned my part. After brunch, Vera clapped her hands and said, "Let's get a picture, one for the family album." We all gathered. I stood near the back, half shaded by an umbrella. Not that anyone adjusted the angle. The photo was posted that evening. I didn't even have to look hard. Cropped, clean. I wasn't in it. The caption read, "Family is everything." I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over Garrett's contact. I typed, "Was I cropped out on purpose?" No answer. Not after 5 minutes. Not after 30. The silence answered for him. I leaned back on the couch, took a deep breath, and stared out the window at the neighbor's dog chasing its tail. I picked up the recorder from my bag, pressed the button, and set it gently on the table. "If they plan to write me out," I said under my breath. "They should have known. I keep receipts." Garrett came home after 10. His keys clattered against the kitchen counter, like they always did when he wanted me to know he'd arrived, but not ask where he'd been. I was sitting on the couch, laptop open, but screen untouched, my mind spinning in loops that had nowhere else to land. "I saw the photo," I said without turning around. He poured himself a glass of water, took a long sip, then replied casually, "What photo?" "The one Vera posted, the brunch. You know, the one I wasn't in." He leaned on the counter. "I think she just cropped it, not on purpose." I closed the laptop. "And you let it sit there like that?" He didn't answer. He just shrugged and walked toward the hallway, as if the conversation didn't merit more than that. As if my absence in his family's so-called everything wasn't worth acknowledging. That was the moment I stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, I drove to Vera's. No invitation, no warning. I rang the bell and waited until she opened the door with that ever-practiced smile. "Jolene," she said, like she'd just remembered I existed. "This is a surprise." "Just a quick question," I replied, stepping into the foyer. "Do you remember where this necklace came from?" I pulled the chain from my collarbone, letting it fall against my palm. She glanced down, her eyes flickering for only a second. "Looks familiar," she said slowly. "Evelyn wore something just like that in Paris. Maybe it's the same. Who knows?" "I didn't realize affection came secondhand," I replied, steady. "But I guess some things are just convenient to recycle." Vera tilted her head. "Some things are classic, worth reusing." I smiled, but it didn't touch my eyes. "Next time you exclude me, I'll make sure the whole world sees it." She didn't blink. "You do that, dear." That was it. No remorse, no shock. She'd been waiting for me to say it. She wanted me to threaten her. Because in her world, this wasn't about love. It was about optics, control, reputation. I was a variable in her image, one she thought she could crop out like a stranger in the background of a beach photo. When I got home, I started mailing myself copies of everything: screenshots, posts, photos I was erased from, every missed caption, every backhanded comment. I made folders. I backed up the backups. If they wanted to pretend I wasn't there, I'd make damn sure the record told otherwise. Later that week, I ran into Melis at the co-op, just by the herbal tea section. She wasn't her usual chatty self. She stared at me for a moment before blurting, "They never wanted Garrett to marry you." I didn't react. I just looked at the box of chamomile I was holding. "You were the safe bet after Evelyn left." "That's what Vera said. You weren't a mistake, just a backup plan." Her voice wavered at the end, like she realized the weight of it only as she said it aloud. I looked at her directly. "I wasn't their mistake," I said calmly. "I was their contingency. That's worse." She didn't argue. That night, I walked into my studio, turned on one warm lamp in the corner, pulled the curtain halfway down. The desk light created a small pool of clarity, just enough space for what I needed to do. I set up the camera, checked the angle, sat down. "This isn't for them," I said into the lens. "This is for the version of me that believed them." I paused, stared straight into the glass. Now watch me rewrite the ending. It was a Tuesday morning, cool and forgettable, until it wasn't. I was straightening the jewelry tray on my dresser, half distracted, when I noticed the chain had flipped over. The necklace Garrett gave me on our 5th anniversary. I'd worn it so often it felt like skin. But this time, I saw it. There was something etched faintly on the back of the pendant. I held it to the light, tilted it, squinted. Just 3 letters, barely visible. E-R. My stomach didn't drop. It curled. Quiet and precise. I sat down on the edge of the bed, thumb grazing over the initials. Evelyn Renee. That's what she signed on birthday cards. That's what she carved into her senior yearbook. And now it was hanging around my neck. I grabbed my phone and opened her public photo archive. She'd always loved being seen. I typed Paris. A second later, there it was. A photo of her in a champagne dress, sipping something pink at an outdoor cafe. Her hair in a loose twist. And the necklace. My necklace. The same chain, the same stone, the same engraving. He hadn't even bothered to rewrap the lie. My hands moved faster than my heart. I pulled up our bank account, flipped back to the date he said he'd bought the necklace. I remembered because it was the same weekend he told me he had a vendor meeting in Chicago. There it was. A charge from a boutique in Evanston, 2 days before our anniversary. My name wasn't mentioned in the purchase, but the timestamp lined up. He bought her a gift, then handed it to me like a consolation prize. When the timeline doesn't add up, I whispered, the truth already walked out. The next evening, Vera invited us for dinner. Garrett went ahead. I arrived late, partly because I couldn't bring myself to ride with him, partly because I needed the space. We were in the dining room when Vera let it slip. She always did when she got comfortable enough, when her wine glass dipped below half full. She was talking about Evelyn's new condo in Atlanta, how lovely her guest room was. Then she said it. We even kept her room ready, just in case. I set my fork down. In case what, Vera? She smiled without looking up. In case he remembered who he was before you. Garrett didn't flinch. He didn't defend me, not even a glance. I stood up quietly, left the room. No scene, no slamming doors. Just me and my own pulse, trying not to scream inside my ribs. That night, I went to the closet, pulled out the necklace box. I placed the chain inside, added a small sticky note that said only, "Return to sender." I left it on Garrett's dresser, said nothing, did nothing else. He saw it the next morning, picked it up, read the note, then set it down without a word. That silence told me more than any apology ever could. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop. I created a folder. I called it Just in Case. Into it, I dragged the screenshots, the receipts, the cropped photos, the family comments, the flight logs, the emails Vera once forwarded to me that had Evelyn still on CC. If they ever wondered when I stopped being naive, this was it. The box was sitting on the porch, like a little bomb made of gingham ribbon and brown twine. I almost stepped over it, thinking it was another delivery for the neighbor. But no, there it was. My name scribbled under the family, in loopy handwriting I hadn't seen in person in years, but had memorized just the same. I brought it inside, set it on the counter, and opened it with the tip of my house key. Cookies, homemade, carefully stacked with parchment, sugar-dusted, tied with red string like something out of a holiday magazine, and tucked between them a handwritten card. Hope this sweetens the season. Love always E. Garrett walked in from the garage as I was reading. He saw the open box and chuckled like someone had just turned on his favorite sitcom. "That's so Evelyn," he said, smiling faintly. I didn't laugh. I didn't speak. I walked to the drawer, grabbed a pen, and on the back of the envelope, I wrote the date. Then I took a photo of the entire package, for the record. Later that evening, I checked the family group chat, the one I was rarely active in but never removed from. The cookies were already famous. Milese had posted a photo of them arranged on her grandmother's china. "She still thinks of us. Evelyn, you're an angel." Hearts, fire emojis, laughing faces. No one tagged me. No one even asked if I got any. Milese followed up with, "You still make the best, E." I stared at the screen until the blue light felt like it was burning through my face. The next morning, I drove over to Vera's. I didn't call first, just showed up with a small candle from the market and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. She opened the door in a silk robe and bright lipstick, ready for guests, even when she pretended not to be. "Well, this is a surprise," she said. "I figured it was time to drop in," I replied. "Besides, I hear the cookies are excellent." She laughed, stepping aside. "Some women leave, but their recipes stay." I tilted my head. "So do their fingerprints." Vera sipped from her tea, unbothered. "Maybe that's what makes her unforgettable." I looked around the living room. Nothing of mine had ever made it to these walls. No framed photos, no keepsakes. But there was Evelyn's painting, the one from that summer art class she took in Santa Fe, hung right above the fireplace like it was family heirloom. I didn't stay long, made up an excuse about having errands. On the way home, I stopped by the grocery store, picked up flour, sugar, butter. I baked my own cookies, ones my mom used to make every Thanksgiving. I didn't decorate them, didn't label them. I wrapped them in plain wax paper, stuck a note on top that simply read, "For me." I took them to the trash bin, opened the lid, and tossed the whole thing in. It wasn't about cookies. It was about space, identity. I was drawing lines again, even if no one else could see them. That night, I sat in the quiet of my studio. The house had gone still. Garrett was upstairs, probably asleep, or pretending. I was scrolling through files on my phone, looking for something, anything to distract me from the weight of it all, when a call came in. No number, just private caller. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. It was background noise at first, then a burst of laughter, sharp, familiar. Evelyn's voice. God, if she only knew. Then a man's voice. Garrett? Maybe. It was muffled, low. Then the message cut off. I didn't move. Just sat there with the phone in my hand, and a silence so thick it felt like static in my ears. That laugh didn't just echo. It followed me. Vera never hosted anything casually. Her anniversary dinner was no exception. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks early, embossed, gold-trimmed, addressed to Garrett and Guest, as if I were just a placeholder name she couldn't remember. I arrived alone, by choice. Garrett had gone early, of course, said he needed to help set up, though I suspected his idea of helping meant standing around while Evelyn chose table linens. Lakewood Manor was lit like a film set, warm bulbs strung above the patio, a string quartet tuning quietly by the fountain. I walked in wearing black, sharp lines, simple jewelry, no frills. I didn't come to smile. I came to finish what they started. Inside, everyone was gathered around the long dining table. Vera held court at the head. Garrett sat beside her, and to his right, Evelyn, in a pale blue dress, with sleeves just like the one Vera had once told me, felt too modern on me. I found my seat, far left, neatly labeled, neatly isolated. Dinner was already underway. Polite laughter bounced off the walls. I didn't engage. I barely touched my food. I watched. After the main course, the lights dimmed. Vera stood and tapped her glass with a dessert spoon. "We've had years together," she began. "Years of memories, of milestones, of family. And tonight, we honor that journey." A projector screen lowered. The slideshow started. Soft piano music, elegant transitions, photos of her and Silas through the decades. Then came the curveball. Photos from family events, Lake Tahoe, Christmases, birthdays, and then Garrett and Evelyn, holding hands near the fire pit, laughing under a canopy of string lights. Another one, Evelyn leaning on his shoulder, champagne in hand. Not one photo of me. "Some memories," Vera said, her voice warm and pointed, "never fade." I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I waited. When the lights came up, I stood. My chair scraped gently against the floor. "Lovely slideshow," I said, calm, though I noticed I didn't make the final cut. Vera blinked. A few heads turned. "But since we're sharing memories," I continued, pulling a small flash drive from my bag, "I thought I'd bring one of my own." I walked to the AV stand, plugged in the drive, and hit play. The room went quiet. First came the audio. Evelyn's voice, clear as day. "Vera thinks she runs everything. Let her. She's too self-absorbed to notice half of what goes on anyway." Then Garrett's voice. "I still think about that night. The fire, your perfume. It wasn't supposed to end that way." A fork hit a plate. I let the audio play, one clip after another. No narration, just facts, text messages, voicemails. A video of Garrett walking into Evelyn's condo during a trip he told me was all business. Garrett stood, moved toward the system, but I stepped between him and the screen. "Let them hear it all," I said quietly. Vera stared at me like I'd walked in wearing blood. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. "How long have you known?" she whispered. I looked at Garrett, then Evelyn. "Long enough," I said. "Long enough to know this table's never had a seat for me." No one spoke. The only sound was the closing click of the flash drive as I pulled it free. I turned and walked out. The cool air outside felt like relief. I didn't look back. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Milas. "They're freaking out. Are you okay?" I typed slowly, deliberately. I've never been clearer. It was a quiet afternoon. The kind that tricks you into thinking everything's fine. The kind where the noise comes in unexpected ways. Milo's giggle floated down the hallway, light and harmless, the way only a child's can be. I figured he was watching something silly on YouTube Kids again, and I let it be. But after a few minutes, his laugh turned into something more curious. Not joyful, curious. I walked into the living room to find him sitting cross-legged on the couch, the family iPad in his lap, flipping through the photo gallery. He looked up at me with the open-faced honesty only kids manage. "Mommy, is this recent?" he asked, tilting the screen toward me. There, in full color, was Garrett, my husband, his arm around Evelyn at what looked like a dinner party. Same suit he wore to Vera's anniversary event. Same grin he used to save for our early years. She was holding a wine glass, laughing at something just outside the frame. "Daddy looks happy," Milo said. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It walks in holding an iPad. I gently took the device from Milo, kissed the top of his head, and told him to grab his sneakers. It was almost time for his karate class. When he ran off, I airdropped the photo to my own phone and sent it to my cloud backup. Then I deleted it from the iPad. Quiet, clean, like the kind of erasure they'd practiced so well. Garrett came in an hour later, set his keys down, glanced at the iPad still on the table. He didn't pick it up, didn't ask a thing. We sat in the same room for 20 minutes, him scrolling his phone, me pretending to read a magazine. The silence between us was louder than any accusation. The next morning, I drove Milo to school. He buckled in, swinging his feet back and forth, chewing a granola bar. "Mommy?" he asked from the back seat. "Yes, love?" "Why don't they like you?" I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Who's they?" "Grandma said Evelyn was better for us, but you cook better than her. I told her that." My throat tightened. I kept my voice calm. Sometimes grown-ups confuse familiarity with love, but it doesn't make them right. He nodded like that answer was good enough. Kids don't need much, just truth that doesn't come wrapped in lies. After drop-off, I couldn't go home. I parked in front of my studio instead, sat there for a while, then went in, turned on a single lamp, and sat at the center table. I played the voicemail again, the one from Evelyn's accidental call. Her laughter in the background, that flippant, piercing sound. God, if she only knew. I didn't cry this time. I saved it, dragged it into the same folder with the iPad photo. Then I renamed the folder, Inheritance of Truth. They loved who made them feel powerful, not who made them feel seen. That was the thread. That was what connected all of this. Garrett, Vera, even Evelyn. They protected the illusion, not the person. That night, while I was folding towels, my phone buzzed. A message from Vera. "Let's talk, family to family." I stared at it. Not because I didn't expect it, but because the timing was so predictable. When things cracked, she always reached for the glue. But we had never been family. Not in the way that mattered. If only we'd ever been that, I whispered, deleting the message. Then I opened my laptop and started preparing for the kind of closure that didn't ask for anyone's permission. It had been 3 days since the anniversary dinner. The family group chat was silent. Vera hadn't been seen at the church bake sale, and Garrett was no longer coming home at night. I wasn't surprised. He didn't like sitting in rooms where he couldn't control the narrative. That dinner stripped his version of us bare, and he had nothing left to say. The phone rang late Thursday morning. It was my cousin Leah, blunt as ever. "You blew up the family tree with one USB, she said. No hello. No breath between the words. I leaned against the kitchen counter, coffee cooling beside me. "No," I answered calmly. "I just pruned it." There was a pause. Then a small, unexpected laugh. "Well," she said, "they sure weren't expecting that." Later that day, a new post appeared on Vera's Facebook. A throwback to a summer cookout, a time I vaguely remembered. I'd been there. I remembered bringing the lemonade because the caterer canceled last minute. But in the photo Vera posted, I wasn't in it. I knew the picture. I remembered the angle. I'd stood just behind the group with my hand on Garrett's back. This version of the image had been cropped. Carefully, like I'd never existed. The caption read, "Blood remembers, water fades." I took a screenshot and added it to the Inheritance of Truth folder. No commentary, just documentation. That night, I posted my own picture, me and Milo baking cookies in our kitchen. His hands covered in flour, mine holding the bowl steady. No filters, no edits. I didn't write a caption, but the post received 3 times the engagement of Vera's. Reactions poured in. Old friends, neighbors, even Garrett's college roommate, writing, "Now that's what family looks like." When Garrett finally came back 2 days later, he looked smaller. Not physically, but in that way people do when they realize they've lost the audience they were performing for. He didn't take off his coat. We ate in silence. Halfway through the meal, he spoke. "You embarrassed everyone." I put my fork down slowly, not with anger, but finality. Good, I said. Now they know how I felt for years. He didn't argue, just stared at his plate like it might offer better answers than I ever could. The next morning, I called my attorney. We met at her office off Westport Road. I brought a manila folder full of everything: printouts, emails, the flash drive. She skimmed through quietly, then looked up. "Are you angry?" she asked. "No," I replied. "I'm clear." We started the paperwork. Freedom isn't always a burst of celebration. Sometimes it's just the steady rhythm of a pen signing your name on lines that say, "No more." Back at home, I folded the laundry, made dinner for Milo, kept moving. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just felt free. Not the kind of freedom people post quotes about. The real kind, the one where peace becomes your boundary, not a luxury. That night, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through emails, when Garrett's name flashed across my screen. A text. It was a photo. Evelyn. Pale. In a hospital gown. No makeup. Hooked to an IV. Her eyes closed. His message. "She's not well. We didn't know." I stared at it. Then I closed the phone. You don't get to weaponize someone else's pain to cover the damage you've done to me. Sunday mornings used to mean coffee and silence, folding the newspaper open in the same order, watching the steam curl above my mug like it had something sacred to say. But this one started with a ping on my phone. It was Vera. "Family brunch. No drama. Just talk." I stared at the screen like it was written in a foreign language. No drama? Just talk? It's always the ones who break you that think brunch fixes it, I muttered. Still, I went. Not for peace, for confirmation. When I arrived, the house was dressed in soft jazz and the smell of oversweet coffee cake. Everyone was already seated. Garrett looked up when I walked in, gave me a nod like we were two coworkers attending the same mandatory meeting. I didn't take the seat they had opened for me. I pulled out the chair at the end and sat like I belonged there, because I did. Vera greeted me with a rehearsed smile. "We've all made mistakes, Jolene." I took a sip of water. "I didn't mistake who you were," I said. I ignored it. Garrett's fork froze over his eggs. The conversation moved on, but my words stayed in the room, hanging heavier than the framed family portrait above the mantel, one I was never invited to pose for. Midway through the meal, Vera cleared her throat, dabbed the corner of her mouth. "She's not well," she said. "Evelyn. She's in treatment now." I didn't flinch. I didn't offer sympathy or shade. "I hope she heals," I said evenly, "but don't mistake her illness as an eraser." The table quieted, and then, as if on cue, Uncle Randy raised his glass. "To Evelyn," he said with a laugh. "Still one of us." I lifted my water glass slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding of exactly where I stood. I didn't toast. I didn't blink. I just let them see that silence could cut deeper than any word. Later, as people began to gather their coats and leftovers, Malis pulled me aside in the hallway. "I was wrong," she whispered. "You didn't deserve what we did." I looked at her. She was holding a Tupperware of leftover quiche like an apology. "I know," I said. "No warmth, no forgiveness, just truth. Forgiveness isn't owed, especially when it's only asked after exposure." As I reached the front door, Garrett followed. He didn't speak until I had my hand on the handle. "Are we really done?" he asked. I turned to him slowly. "We were done the moment you let them cheer for her and let me drown in silence." He didn't follow, didn't ask again. I walked to my car in silence, keys already in my hand. I didn't need closure, I needed clarity. And now, I have it. The gala was a black tie affair hosted by the Lexington Children's Foundation. Small town name, big city energy. The kind of event where the lighting's dim enough to hide your wrinkles, but the judgment never blinks. Vera was there. Of course she was. Garrett, too. and a handful of others who'd built their lives around keeping appearances just polished enough to pass. I arrived 10 minutes after the scheduled start. Alone. Not fashionably late. Intentionally so. I wore a sleek navy sheath dress, minimal jewelry, my hair pulled back. I didn't come to turn heads. I came to walk away with mine held high. As I entered, I saw them all at their table. Vera stiffened slightly when she noticed me. Garrett's jaw twitched the way it always did, when he wasn't sure whether to stand or sit still. I nodded politely, took my place at a different table, among strangers who didn't carry my history like baggage. Midway through the evening, one of the organizers spotted me and smiled brightly. "You're Jolene, right? Would you be willing to say a few words? You were one of the first sponsors of this event years ago." I hesitated for just a moment. Then I rose and made my way to the stage. The microphone felt warm from the last speaker. I adjusted it slightly and looked out, not just at Vera and Garrett, but at all the people who had taught me that silence wasn't peace, it was protection. For them, not for me. "I wasn't expecting to speak tonight," I began, steady. "But I've learned that the moments you don't plan for are often the ones you need most." A few people smiled. I used to believe that staying quiet was the high road, that swallowing hurt made me stronger. But silence in the face of cruelty is just compliance dressed up in grace. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I stepped down to a long stretch of stillness. No clapping, just breath-holding recognition. And I walked out before anyone could catch up. Near the exit, I stopped at the donation table. Among the envelopes and thank you notes, I left one marked, "For Vera's Legacy Archive." Inside was everything: printed transcripts, screenshots, copies of the voicemails, the emails, even the photo Evelyn had deleted from her social media. But not before I archived it. Each item annotated, dates, times, context, and on top, a single sticky note. "You toasted the wrong woman, and this time, you don't get to delete me." I walked out into the night air, without checking if anyone followed. Later, around 10:30, Garrett called. "We messed up," he said, "but this doesn't have to be the end." I looked at my reflection in the living room window, steady, whole. "It was the end long ago," I told him. "You just didn't recognize the exit sign." He didn't call back. Months passed. I didn't move away. I rebuilt exactly where they watched me fall. These days, I lead a creative writing workshop for women. Not victims, survivors, storytellers. I tell them healing doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it's just getting your name back, your voice back. Milo helps me prep the room every Thursday afternoon. Last week, he looked up from the whiteboard he was scribbling on and said, "You're the bravest person I know." I smiled, but didn't say a word. Because real strength doesn't always need to speak. It just keeps standing. They raised a glass to someone else. So I built a life that didn't need their toast.